So we are on chapter 8 of your world history, and we're starting with section 8.2, and we're talking about from republic to empire, and we're talking about Roman history, the period of expansion, the problems with expansion, and then of course a century of revolution. The period of expansion. The rise of the Roman Empire began with the conquest of Italy. In 265 BC, the Romans had conquered the Etruscans and subdued the Gauls and seized the Greeks. The Etruscans being the hardest one to conquer, as we can see, these are some Etruscan warriors. Rome had conquered them by force and took over the Italian peninsula. The legions. What is a legion? Well, a legion is a Roman military unit of 3,000 to 5,000 foot soldiers. That's a lot of soldiers. And cavalry, and they used these legions to discourage any type of rebellion. So once they had conquered these people, it was easy to keep them under control because they had such a huge military with many legions. How did they treat the conquered? Well, Rome adopted policies that encouraged loyalty among their subjects. So once they conquered, they tried to keep them loyal. So many times they granted them citizenship to their conquered peoples and gave them rights and protections, especially by the first century. So Rome encouraged them to think that they'd have peace and order and prosperity so that they would be content and they wouldn't revolt, right? So Rome's allies paid tribute and provided soldiers. That means anyone that they conquered, and even their allies, they paid tribute, paid money for protection with that great Roman military. And also they provided soldiers too. So here's a picture of Rome coming in and trying to influence the peoples of other countries. Conflicts with Carthage. Okay, these are going to be the first conflicts you're going to need to know, and they're going to be called the Punic Wars. So the first one, Punic War. We're going to go through a lot, but just remember, Punic War, where first it was Carthage. Well, where's Carthage? It's kind of a weird map here, but this is supposed to be the boot of Italy down here, and this is Africa. You see, Carthage is going to be all along Africa. Here's Carthage. It's along the Mediterranean Sea. They had taken over Spain, and you can see the Punic Wars. This is the Mediterranean Sea here, and the Punic Wars come up and about in here. That's how they got over with their. Carthage was known to bring in elephants, and so coming into Italy, they come over the Alps and down or come this way over the Alps, down this way or this way. That was their path. So it's Carthage. They come over into Spain and over the Alps down this way, and then come back here, and this is Zama. So we're going to talk Romans territory. These are the battles and stuff, but we'll talk a little bit about those. So conflicts with Carthage. In 400 BC, Rome's major enemy was Carthage. You would think you could see why, because Carthage basically had the ships of the Mediterranean, and so did Italy. Carthage was a very proud and very prosperous country at that time. And so was Italy. Italy very much wanting to take them over and thinking that they had the Roman military to be able to take them over with, with the legions. But Carthage too had a military. The Punic Wars, we're going to talk about that. The Punic Wars, Punic means Phoenician. Phoenician was the ancient peoples that settled in this area. So the Punic Wars, they fought a series of 3 wars between 264 and 146 BC. So close to 100 years. Punic means Punicus for Phoenician. So just so you know that. And that's probably be a test question. The first Punic War was 261 to 241 BC. Rome experienced a series of defeats at first. It looked like those the people from Carthage were definitely going to come in and be able to attack with their huge fleets. So this basically started with a fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. And then Rome developed a superior navy. during this time so that they could fight fight the Carthaginians. So, in fighting these Carthaginians would be an important feat for them, especially as they both would need a navy. The Roman fleets achieved a victory over the Carthaginians then. At first, Rome had a defeat, but then a victory. So the First Punic War ends up with a victory for Rome in 241 BC. And then Rome added the islands of Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica. And because the Phoenicians then, or the Carthaginians, actually occupied those islands, and so they took over those islands that are south of Italy. The Second Punic War was 218. So here we have, a war starting again. And this is the second one, quite quickly. This one was the one, whenever you know about a Punic War, with the Carthaginians and Romans, you are definitely going to think of this war. So it was because they had a famed Carthaginian general named Hannibal. This is supposed to be like Hannibal here. Well, Hannibal was a very fierce general, I should say, as he was very proud, and he did indeed think he could subdue Rome in the beginning. In the end, he wearied out. Let's just say that. But Hannibal came over the Alps. Remember how I said he came over the Alps? How did they get to the Alps? From Africa. Well, they had to come through Spain and up over Spain to get down through the Alps. So Rome would not think that they were going to be conquered through the Alps at this time, because they thought basically the Alps were, mountains. Well, Hannibal decided to go through the mountain route. And the Battle of Cannae in 216, or Cannae, however they pronounce it, in 216 BC, Hannibal annihilated the Romans. So he went through and he brought in and attacked them with elephants. Can you believe that? He had lots of elephants. Elephants were like tanks of back in that time, I guess. Anyway, Hannibal lacked the resources to follow up his victory, though, and he laid siege to Rome. So in laying siege to Rome, he really didn't lay siege to Rome. Let's just say that. He should have went forth and laid a siege to him and decided that he was not going to. So the Romans dispatched an army under Scipio. And Scipio was that general at that time that they thought that the whole legions would follow. And they went into the Battle of Zama. Battle of Zama, Hannibal lost to Scipio in 202 BC. So even the Second Punic War, you would think that the Carthaginian general would indeed win with all of his troops and his elephants, but he didn't. So, he actually would have if he would have laid siege to Rome, and he didn't. He just didn't follow up on that victory and thought, oh, we won. Well, Rome followed up and attacked the Carthaginians. So the Carthaginians forced to relinquish their empire and pay Rome a huge indemnity. So they gave up, and Rome won control of Spain now, and also an ally of Numidia, and that's a kingdom adjoining Carthage. So right now they had an ally right next to Carthage, and they also had Spain. So basically, Hannibal and all of his efforts just went to the side. Rome came in and conquered even during the Second Punic War. The Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BC. The wars go on. The Numidians attacked Carthage and forced Carthage to fight against their Roman ally. So Numidians were an ally of Rome, but they ended up attacking Carthage, and they asked Rome to come in and help them attack Carthage. So Carthage is not only fighting against Rome, but is also fighting against the Numidians, which were their neighbor. So Rome came into the war then, and the Carthaginians resisted for 3 years. For 3 years they were fighting. That's quite about a long time. So for 3 years they were fighting against Rome. And then they were overwhelmed when Carthage was burned. For 17 days, Rome burned the city of Carthage. The inhabitants of Carthage were killed or they were sold into slavery. Their land, their beautiful land, was plowed up and put salt throughout all of their farmlands and was cursed. It was plowed out and salted so that it would not be able to be used. So they couldn't start, building up their city again. And Rome remained supreme in the Mediterranean now, had full control now, because they now controlled Carthage. They now controlled the Carthaginians. So. The conquest in the east. So now Rome is going to the east. So Rome battles with Macedonian and the Syrians. They're in the east. Macedonian, remember, is Greece. We talk about Syrians, we're talking about the Middle East. We're actually talking about Syrians are right next to Israel too. So basically Palestine would probably be included in that. In 146 BC, they subdued Macedonia and Greece. So they're battling, they subdued them. And they made them provinces in the Roman Empire. In 133 BC, the king of Pergamum died. And this king of this colony there, Pergamum, was willing and willed his, I should say willing, but he willed, it says willing, willed his kingdom to Rome when he died. He said, when I die, Rome can have my kingdom. So Pergamum became a springboard for the Roman domination in all of Asia Minor and Middle East. So Pergamum became that place now owned by Rome where they could bring their army in and keep their army there as an outpost so they could attack all of Asia Minor and then control the whole Middle East. In 133 BC, Rome was master of the Mediterranean world now. They did conquer all of this area. The problems of expansion now. Well, Rome was successful in their wars and conquest, but that kind of washed away the foundation of the Republic. It eroded their character. Because as more citizens came in, what happened? They had to take care of more people, and they were bringing in the food and riches from other countries. So the farmers, the lower class and the farmers of Rome became poor and had to move into the cities. Before they had lived simply modestly, and now because of the cost now of farming, when they were bringing in food from other places, they couldn't sell their products at all. So discipline, hard work, and patriotism eroded as a lot of the farmers moved into the bigger cities, I should say. The breakdown of the Roman people, the Roman family. The Roman family now would start to break down. There would be many divorces, and of course I talked about the cheaper grain that poured into into Rome and ruined the farmers, forcing them to sell their land and moving into the cities. And many slaves brought competition, and that competition, as they came in, they had to fight for jobs because of the slaves were actually taking many of the jobs. And as slaves, they were working for the wealthy landowners and such. There were many impoverished, discontented, and unemployed people. Like that picture, don't you? Kind of says that's how it looks actually, nowadays, But you can see kind of it has a sad picture of Rome. A few wealthy Romans. Well, there's a few wealthy Romans. Here's the dress of the Roman time of the wealthy women. A few profited buying up lands vacated by the farmers and created vast estates with slave labor. So they had a few wealthy people. Others made fortunes in government business and the government paid them higher prices for their service, so you still ended up with just a few wealthy Romans. And most people were either slaves. I think up to 3/4 of all the people at that time were slaves, and then there was a lot of poverty too. Hostile groups. A few wealthy men controlled most of the land and money, which happens a lot, even today. But multitudes of poor people clamored for free food and entertainment. This is really a sad thing. They called it the bread and circuses. So the corrupt politicians gave people what they wanted to buy their votes. So kind of happening today, isn't it? So basically, these corrupt politicians, they decided to bring out food and give the people and the poor food as long as they would vote for them. And handouts squelched traditional ideals of personal initiative and self-respect. Basically, they were just after the food, and they were competing to get bread, get their food, and then be entertained. And so the corrupt politicians gave the people entertainment by the circuses. What are the circuses? They were the gladiator rings. They would bring in, as they brought in the slaves, and then also the people that they overcame, or the people that they conquered of other nations. They brought these people in and they put them in the gladiator rings, and even trained some of them so that they would perform in the rings for the crowds. And as they performed for the crowds, they would end up dying. You know, there'd be battles. They put battles in there. They had battles, but people would really die. And people would watch people die and then glory in how sad and how much suffering. So people would start glorying in the suffering of other people. So the bread and the circuses, isn't that even today? People want to watch the suffering of other people, you know, instead of getting out and having that Christian ethics, they had opposite. They were focusing on themselves, the bread and the circuses. The circuses. Okay, I kind of went over that already, but the circuses of entertainment fed the depraved human nature to take pleasure in the suffering of others. Thousands crowded to watch the gladiators. And the gladiators were prisoners of war, slaves of criminals who were forced to fight in these public shows. And the fighting men, and they would fight men, and they'd fight beasts too. They'd bring in, here you have a tiger coming in. And actually, in the time of the persecution of the Christians, they would throw the Christians into the gladiator rings and watch them be eaten by lions. It's terrible. A century of revolution. So revolution is turmoil. 133 to 30 BC. The aristocrats, they were the very wealthy, controlled the Senate and opposed the measures of reform of the common people. So the aristocrats controlled. And then ambitious men strove for power by appealing to the masses as the voice of the poor. So you'd have the aristocrats and then others coming in, trying to take over and say, okay, we're going to represent the poor, when they really would, as soon as they would get nominated or elected to a position, they would probably not really care one bit about the poor in many cases. Reforms. The reforms that happened, we start with the Gracchi brothers. And so Gracchi brothers, I think, had a heart towards the poor. And we'll see that just by their descendants and what they did. Although they fought, had to fight for this, to be able to help the poor. So Tiberius Gracchus became a tribune. Remember, tribune is that legal place to represent people, poor people that couldn't be represented or weren't able to be represented. They called it the tribune, to stand for someone that was legally being incriminated. So they championed the cause of the poor, and they convinced the concilium plebis. Remember that the plebis with the poor people, that's where they go when they had a problem, to change things for the poor, to enact reforms which limited the land that one could own and distributed lands of the poor. So basically they were going to limit. They had landowners that owned most of the land, and also they wanted to distribute some land to the poor and limit the how much a wealthy person could possess of the land. So to basically bring in some public lands too. Well, the wealthy, and of course the wealthy and the senators opposed Tiberius Gracchus. They said, no, we're not going to give up our land. And then 300 of his followers, of Tiberius Gracchus' followers, were murdered. So, Gaius Gracchus, in 123, that's the brother of Tiberius, he was then elected tribune. Remember, the tribunes are where the poor would go to see if they could get help or get represented, as a representation of the poor. And Gaius attempted to carry out these reforms, and for the government sale of the grain to the poor at low prices, and the creation of new colonies for the poor to migrate to. And the nobles then started riots. So the wealthy started riots. And then Gaius ended up committing suicide, probably because they had confiscated him in some way, or took him in as a prisoner, and he committed suicide, and then 3,000 of Gaius's followers were killed. So Gaius Gracchus and Tiberius Gracchus, sad story, but they were showing forth the rights of the poor. So let's stop right there.